We're grateful to have you with us for today's Fighting Hate from Home, where we will be discussing ADL's 2021 Audit of Anti-Semitic Incidents. As you will see shortly, 2021 was the highest year for incidents against American Jews since ADL started tracking such data in 1979. Anti-Semitic incidents reached a high watermark across virtually every category we monitor: assault, harassment, and vandalism. We also recorded a substantial surge during the May 2021 military conflict between Israel and Hamas. Joining us on today's call to explain further are ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt and Vice President for our Center on Extremism, Oren Segal. And a little later, we'll be hearing from Scott Richman and Brina to present findings from the New York, New Jersey region. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the call over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Deb, so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. I want to just acknowledge how grateful I am for everyone for joining us today. Our annual audit on anti-Semitic incidents is always an important time for ADL because as a data-driven organization, we really rely on this work. We rely on this work to better understand what's happening in our country, what's happening to the Jewish community, and you need to, if you will, measure an issue in order to manage it and mitigate it effectively, and that's really important here. You know, at ADL, our mission for over 100 years, since we were founded in 1913, has been to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice to fair treatment to all. It's a mission that we've worked tirelessly for, again, more than a century to uphold, and one I think, as you'll see in the data that we're about to walk through, remains as important and as urgent as ever. And central to our work and our kind of collective job description here at ADL of protecting the Jewish people is to fight anti-Semitism whenever we see it, whomever it comes from, right? However it should manifest, which is why this data is so important. So we know, what is happening, where it's happening, and to whom it is happening. Only then can we effectively address it. So why don't we go to the, if you will, to the slides, thank you. So let's go to this first data. Deb alluded to this. And you can see in this snapshot, every year, since all the way back to 1979, we've conducted this annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. It compiles information provided by victims, law enforcement, community leaders, partner organizations. It's supplemented by media reports and research from our Center on Extremism. You're going to hear from Oren Segal, the Vice President of the Center, in a few minutes. He and I are here today, along with Scott and the rest of the ADL staff, to share the findings from the audit and to warn against this rising tide of anti-Semitism. And what you can see in the graph in front of you, after what was a steady decline from about 2001, the number started to move upwards in 2016. 2016 to 17 was a 57% spike. That was the single largest year-over-year increase we had ever tracked in the history of this organization. While the numbers dipped slightly in 2018, that was the year of the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the most violent anti-Semitic attack in American history. In 2019, the numbers reached a high watermark of 2,107. That had been the highest number we had ever seen. In 2020, the number dipped slightly, but really only slightly, despite the COVID closures all over the country. Then in 2021, the world still wasn't fully reopened yet. People were still socially distancing. Businesses were still shuttered. Campuses were still closed. And yet 2021, far and away the highest total we have ever seen. So let me just repeat that. After seeing the high watermark in 2019, after seeing a historic surge in 2017, after having the third highest total in 2020, 2021 represented a new high in this work, or maybe one could say a new low. Next slide. Of these incidents, anti-Semitic assaults were up 167%. That's a total of 131 people who were targeted. Acts of harassment were up 43%. Vandalism was up as well. Attacks against Jewish institutions like day schools or shuls and synagogues or JCCs were up 60+%. Incident at K through 12 schools they spiked 106%, and acts on college campuses as well rose 21%, keeping in mind that the campuses weren't even open all year last year. I mean, the data is stunning. Next slide. So you can see in the month to month, which calls out what you'll see right there, what happened in May of 2021. Can we double click and go to the next slide? Because I want to talk about May specifically. Yeah, you can see this here. This, I will just say, to put this in some context, these May data, what happened in May of 2021 was the fighting in Gaza, when the terror organization Hamas lobbed missiles at Israeli population centers and fighting broke out between Israel and Hamas. Now, what's notable is that we have had acts of terror in the Middle East, conflict that has often sparked some anti-Semitism, but never quite like this. Raw, relentless violence and harassment targeting Jews. In the month of May, we logged 387 anti-Jewish acts. That was a massive increase of 141% year over year. That included more than a dozen brazen assaults with people beaten and brutalized in broad daylight without any provocation, attacked for the crime of wearing a kippah. And I've got to say, the people who are attacking them weren't wearing MAGA hats. To those of you who might be watching us today who think, oh, it's the extreme right and the phenomenon that had been unleashed, in the Trump administration, I got news for you. The people who are attacking Jews, some of them are wearing keffiyehs. They were coming out of anti-Israel rallies. These people were hardcore radical anti-Zionists, preaching extremism as ugly as any other form. And we've written about this. I wrote a long piece in Newsweek when this happened last summer. It was in June. I wrote a long piece in the Post last fall. We've talked about this again and again, but the data doesn't lie. The anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and it spawns hatred, hateful rhetoric, spawns hostile actions on the ground in the real world that affect all Jews, regardless of your feelings of the state of Israel. The acts that we see happening toward individuals is just awful and ugly. Go to the next slide. And so as you can see here, these are just some examples, but we have many images, many stories that help to make the data come alive, where incidents of harassment or vandalism or violence incorporated anti-Israel or anti-Zionist themes, or expressed classic anti-Jewish animus, anti-Semitic slurs, conspiratorial accusations, wild theories that demonize Jews, that delegitimize the state of Israel, and that create an environment in which, whether it's students on a college campus or coworkers and colleagues at a company, are intimidated, are marginalized, or silenced. We had almost 350 incidents of this sort. That's nearly double what we saw in 2020. Now, some might dismiss this number. They might say, oh, well, it's all political. But let me be clear. These incidents weren't just grotesque displays of anti-Israel hate, although that would be enough. We saw a virtual compilation of like a KTEL compilation of the greatest hits of anti-Semitic rhetoric. Everything from signs like you kind of see here, suggesting that the Jews only care about themselves, to wild Holocaust analogies, to ugly accusations of killing Jesus or killing Gentiles at scale, to other bizarre conspiracies straight out of the protocols of the elders of Zion. So again, to anyone who still entertains the fantasy that anti-Zionism is a legitimate political discourse, it is not. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Underline, period. Whether by the intent of the people propounding it or the outcomes that it generates, it ultimately ends up, again, endangering Jews, regardless of how they observe or what their politics might be. When Jews are being attacked, when synagogues are being vandalized, when Jewish communal offices are being targeted because people are upset about the politics overseas, I'm sorry, that's anti-Semitism. And it is as wrong as targeting Asian American people because you're upset about what's happening in China, or targeting people who are Latino in this country because you're upset about what's happening at the border. It is despicable and disgraceful that it happens. And there's not enough people in positions of authority calling it out clearly and with conviction. And that needs to change. So this annual report focuses on the incidents throughout the year, but we know that the trends didn't end on December the 31st. We started this calendar year with the incident in Colleyville, Texas, a synagogue that was intruded upon by an individual infused with, radical jihadist ideas. And we are thankful that the 4 individuals that he took hostage on that Shabbat morning were released, or really they escaped without incurring any harm. But this incident was just the latest in which Jews have been targeted at their houses of worship. All right, I mentioned Tree of Life. We've also seen incidences like Poway. We've seen Jews attacked in their homes. But last year in 2021, a 61% increase in acts of hate targeting synagogues, Jewish community centers, like I said, day schools, with over 500 such incidents all over the year. Vandalism, Zoom bombing, threats, even assaults. None of this is normal. None of this is acceptable. And one of the starkest findings is that our synagogues and our schools and our rec centers, they remain targets for hate, which is why it is so important that the state and federal leaders provide and resource communal security and additional funding for nonprofit security grants. Now, I'd also just say, we've also seen a series of violent attacks targeting Jews, and we've seen them not just high profile moments like last May, but on a daily basis in places like Brooklyn, where people who appear Orthodox are routinely harassed. They are routinely subjected to ridicule and harassment and assaults. So I think the data lays out and the picture is clear. We must act boldly now to speak out against anti-Semitism, to call out problematic and dangerous rhetoric, and to demand that our leaders enact new policies to protect our community, because there is no silver bullet that will stop this. We have the issues won't dissipate on their own. We have got to act, and we've got to do so together. Nationwide, we need people in positions of authority, whether it's elected officials or corporate chieftains, to use their bully pulpits, religious leaders, educators, campus presidents, college presidents who've been so woefully silent in the face of rising animus against Jews on their own campuses, need to speak out swiftly and sharply and without hesitation. Again, I would like to see more done by elected officials to make sure that our law enforcement, who are so crucial in this process, at ADL, we are so grateful to work closely with the FBI and state and local police, but they need the tools and the training so they can respond effectively to hate crimes, or better yet, prevent them from happening. We need to see schools introduce anti-bias, anti-hate, Holocaust education content to their students so we can inoculate our kids before intolerance takes hold. And I should say, it's not just schools, universities that claim to care about DEI, but don't touch on anti-Semitism. It is shameful. Every DEI program in America should include a module. It should include content on the Jewish experience. There is no excuse for anything less. And while I'm talking a lot about anti-Semitism this morning, as the new special envoy for global anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt, has said, anti-Semitism starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. It augurs much worse in terms of affecting even a broader set of constituents. So this should be a warning call to all Americans. Anti-Semitism isn't just a Jewish problem. It's an American problem. that demonstrates or indicates the decay of our society. So all of us have a stake in addressing it. Now, there'll be more time to talk about this in the Q&A, but before we get to that, I want to turn it over to Oren Segal, who I've already mentioned is our Vice President for the Center on Extremism. He'll talk specifically about extremist-related incidents and touch upon the things we've documented at K through 12 schools, as well as universities and college campuses, Jewish institutions, and especially the hideous practice of targeting Jewish cemeteries. Oren, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan has articulated, this briefing and the findings come at a time where Jews are feeling particularly vulnerable. Vulnerable because of the violent anti-Semitic incidents that have targeted our community over the past several years, but also because of how they've targeted the Jewish community in the last several months. This includes a car ramming attack against Orthodox Jews in Lakewood, New Jersey, the hostage taking at the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, that Jonathan mentioned. But vulnerable also because of the rise in anti-Semitism in the virtual spaces that we all spend so much of our time in. Vulnerable because of the issues that impact the Jewish community are being exploited and politicized on a day-to-day basis. And vulnerable because we are constantly reminded of how events around the world are impacting the Jewish community here. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time digging a little deeper into some of the data. Anti-Semitic incidents, as has been mentioned, have reached highs across virtually every category that we monitor. This includes incidents at K through 12 schools, Jewish institutions like JCCs and on college campuses. This is also true for the incidents that we can track back to extremists. Known extremist groups or individuals inspired by extremist ideologies were responsible for 484 of the incidents we've documented in 2021. This is up from 332 the previous year. That number represents 18% of the total number of incidents that we've documented in 2021. And of those 484 incidents attributed again to extremist movements, groups, and those supporters, 422 took the form of flyers or banners or stickers or written messages, a 52% increase on its own from 2020. Now, the top distributors of anti-Semitic propaganda in 2021 include names like the Folkish Resistance Movement, the New Jersey European Heritage Association, the Goyim Defense League, named after, of course, ourselves. And in recent years, these types of anti-Semitic extremists have been prolific in their activity. We continue to see increased levels of this activity and the confrontational tactics, such as flash mob demonstrations, flyerings across entire neighborhoods designed to create fear and anxiety and even distrust. And this also includes banners on top of highway overpasses. A common trope promoted in the messages of many of these groups is that Jews were collectively responsible for the COVID pandemic. Now, this has echoes of the blood libel and of blaming of Jews for the spread of disease during medieval times. As we reported just a few months ago, many extremists are actually live streaming this activity so that people from the comfort of their own home can engage and provide support for this activity in real time, not just by viewing these activities, but by providing donations through cryptocurrency, which eggs on the anti-Semites and could result, I fear, in them taking even more extreme actions in order to satiate the appetites of their hostile supporters and viewers. Now, let me be clear about this one point. As white supremacists make up about 18% of the total number of incidents, and incidents featuring anti-Zionist and anti-Israel messaging makes up about 13%, that means that the majority of perpetrators are either unknown or average Joes and average Janes. That, to me, speaks to the normalization of anti-Semitism as a belief and as a tactic. And that is just as insidious and just as concerning. Next slide, please. In 2021, there were 331 anti-Semitic incidents in non-Jewish K through 12 schools. Although this is an increase of 106% from the historically low year of 2020, it's basically flat compared with the 5-year average. The 178 incidents of harassment at K through 12 schools included instances of Zoom bombing, where virtual classroom sessions, school district meetings, school club meetings were disrupted by outside actors who displayed anti-Semitic language or swastikas or other messages. School-based harassment incidents in 2021 included various one-off incidents as well. For example, one student told another, quote, "I wish Hitler was alive to kill you and the rest of the Jews." Or when a teacher said, "Maybe the Jews deserve to die," while teaching a class on the Holocaust. Harassment incidents included recurrent anti-Semitic bullying, such as classmates taunting other Jewish students with Holocaust jokes and references. Given the insidious nature of bullying, compounded by the fact that many children may not feel empowered to report their experiences, it's likely that the actual number of anti-Semitic incidents taking place in schools is significantly higher than even the data that we are reporting in our audit. Next slide. In 2021, there were 155 anti-Semitic incidents on college and university campuses reported to us at over 100 campuses around the country. Again, an increase of 21% from 2020. Of the 155 incidents, 87 were harassment, 64 were incidents of vandalism, and 4 were incidents of assault. Acts of vandalism on campus included the desecration of mezuzahs in residence halls, swastika drawings found in academic halls, and images of swastikas accompanied by threatening messages targeting Jewish students. 15% of the campus incidents involved references to Israel or Zionism. We remain deeply disturbed by the level of these incidents on campus and call on more campus administrators to speak out when anti-Semitism occurs there. These incidents deeply impact the Jewish students. They create an environment where they do not feel safe or welcome. Next slide. Now, Jewish institutions, including Jewish schools, community centers, and synagogues, were targeted by 525 anti-Semitic incidents in 21. Of those, 327 targeted synagogues. In total, this represents a 61% increase from 2020. 101 of the incidents were vandalism, 11 were assault, and these assaults took place in 8 states, 3 in New York, 2 in California, and 1 each in Colorado, Florida, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Most acts of vandalism took the form of graffiti, usually with a swastika or other anti-Semitic messages. Other cases involved religious artifacts being tampered with, including mezuzahs being torn down, menorahs stolen, or otherwise vandalized. 29 of the 525 incidents targeting Jewish institutions were perpetrated by extremists. From the hostage situation in Colleyville, which thankfully ended without physical injury, to this month's series of violent attacks against Jews in New York, to recent firings that occurred in the neighborhood of Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh during Passover, there has been an unacceptable cadence of incidents targeting Jews and Jewish institutions, even beyond the 2021 data we are focusing on today. Yes, the audit focuses on 2021, but the issues remain a daily concern for us every day. Next slide. Jewish graves and or cemeteries were desecrated 6 times in 2021. The desecration of Jewish headstones is a long-standing act of anti-Semitism that has been employed by those looking to traumatize and offend Jews. Some of the examples include swastikas etched in multiple areas of an archway to the Jewish section of the Palms Memorial Garden Cemetery in Sarasota, Florida, and a headstone was vandalized with SS bolts and other Nazi imagery at the Bayview, New York-based cemetery, Jersey City. Next slide. To conclude, we collect this data because, as Jonathan has already said, Data drives policy. And the only way to find solutions is to have the data to inform our understanding of the problem. Our 25 regional offices at ADL are on the front lines every single day, responding to each incident they receive from their constituents. In addition to releasing this report, we have added all this data to our interactive heat map so anyone can look up their data in their state, in their city, in their town, compare it to the previous year's data. The numbers represent the stark reality so many of us in the Jewish community have been feeling. But shock, anger, and even disgust at this data is not going to suffice. These insights must inform our response and strategies as we provide aid to our communities and push back against this scourge of hate. Now, I'd like to turn things back over to Deb for some Q&A from the press and the public. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Oren and Jonathan. Let us dive in. We have received a bunch of questions. We're going to take a short break for questions now, and then we're going to hear from some of our colleagues, and we'll come back for Q&A at the end. So if we don't hit your question right away, there will be another opportunity for it to be asked. So we've received multiple questions that sort of center around the same theme. But the first is, can you address the broader increase in reported hate crimes across different groups? This person also names Asian Americans and Muslims who have also seen increases.
Well, I can take a shot at that and then pass it to Oren. So I can't speak to the anti-Muslim crimes. I'm not aware that there's more of them in recent years than in prior years. There's definitely been a marked surge in anti-Asian, sometimes referred to as anti-AAPI hate. AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And it's interesting because there is a parallel to the issue we're talking about today, vis-a-vis anti-Semitism. It shouldn't surprise us when people make unhinged claims about the culpability of the Chinese government for creating or bioengineering COVID-19. When they make wild accusations about how the virus was traveling through the Chinese American and Asian American community, when they made crazy unsubstantiated claims. And then what happened? Crazy people, unhinged people did terrible things to Asian Americans in this country. There's a direct link. And you can have very strong feelings about what's happening in Beijing, how they're treating the Uyghur Muslim minority in the West or the Tibetan minority. You can have strong feelings about the COVID lockdowns and impinging upon the freedoms of people in Hong Kong. But that is not an excuse. That cannot be used as a pretext to harass or to attack Asian American people here in the United States. By the same token, you can have strong feelings about what's happening in the Middle East, but that is not an excuse. It cannot be used as a pretext to attack or harass Jewish people in this country. Now, again, I would not liken Israel to China in any way. One is an authoritarian state, one is a vibrant democracy. But nonetheless, just because you get upset about something over here doesn't give you the prerogative to commit an act of sort of collective guilt against the population here at home. All that being said, the FBI has not yet released the 2021 data, but we do know for 2020 that hate crimes are up against, in particular, Asian Americans, I think Black Americans in the LGBTQ community, as well as the Jewish community. And our data bears out that more recently in 2021, the numbers are way up, and it's all very alarming.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Another question that's perhaps a little bit similar is asking about that data. Is there any way to ascertain how much of the rise that we're seeing in 2021 is due to more reporting and investigations rather than an actual increase in the incidents themselves?
Oren, do you want to take that question?
Sure, it's an important question. And, I think the reality is that we have always felt that the data in the audit was undercounting the reality, right? This was always meant to be a snapshot. So we sort of knew that there are other places where incidents were happening that perhaps we were not aware of. And so one of the things that we do know this year, and that we always ask ourselves is to what extent are the incidents representative of real changes on the ground versus simply variations of the level of reporting. Now, we made a concerted effort to establish partnerships with other Jewish organizations who now all report anti-Semitic incidents that their members and clients encounter to ADL. So the bottom line is we actually do have more data because there are greater reporting to us from our partners. But even when we remove that number, the 18% of incidents that were reported to us that came as a result of partnerships, we would still have broken records. So it's not just that there's more reporting, and sometimes people feel the only thing that they can do to push back is report, and that's a good thing. There's also just a marked increase even beyond.
Thank you, Oren. So this next question, we're seeing various permutations of it, and it's around the topic of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And multiple people who are asking about how do you separate one from the other, and can you be Jewish and still be anti-Zionist? And what is it that we can do about that? And how are we doing a better job at defining it?
Look, so I'll take this, Oren, and then you can jump in. So number one, the reality is that delegitimization is one of these anti-Semitic tropes that's been used against the Jewish people for thousands of years. It is not new. The church tried to delegitimize the Jews and said we weren't a real religion, right? Hitler famous claimed the Jews are definitely a race, just not a human race. He tried to delegitimize our humanity. Now today, our detractors try to delegitimize the Jewish state. But whether you're delegitimizing the Jewish people or the Jewish state, whether you claim eugenics or you claim anti-Zionism, these are all forms of anti-Jewish hate. Now, to be clear, as I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, you can have strong feelings about policies of the state of Israel, but an ideology, quote unquote, I think that's generous, called an ideology, but a set of ideas that are predicated on the negation of another people are as ugly, as racist, and as wrong as white supremacy, a collection of ideas that are all about the negation of another people. Now, that might make some of you uncomfortable, but those are the facts. And again, this isn't just my opinion. And, we see BDS campaigns on campuses. We see people making wild, ugly, slanderous claims against Jews. It is explosive and it is real. And so again, the BDS campaign on campus, when they say that Jews are committing genocide, why are you surprised that the swastika is on the Jewish fraternity? When you say in marches, from the river to the Palestine, we will be free. Why are you surprised when people go attack Jews? Because they say Jews are our enemy. The head of the San Francisco chapter of CARE, in a speech that COE got wind of, that she gave to an audience last fall, claimed that Zionist synagogues, by the way, along with ADL and Jewish federations and Hillels, Zionist synagogues were the enemies of the Muslim community. By the way, just so we're clear, that's pretty much all the synagogues in America and around the world. So you can't begin if you begin to make light of that kind of pathology, you do yourself a tremendous disservice. The last thing I'll say is, can Jews be anti-Semitic? Unfortunately, of course they can. That isn't new. There are Jews for Jesus, and there's Jewish voices for peace. We've always had these marginal actors in our community. And again, you can be upset about Israeli policies. You can speak out against them. Of course you can. But when you focus on negating and undermining only the Jewish right to self-determination, that is discriminatory, it is dangerous, and it's morally reprehensible. And I will say, just to close on this, I say that someone who believes in a two-state solution, who believes that Palestinian people deserve the right to live with dignity and equality in a land of their own, while Israelis live with safety and security in a land of their own. I believe that. It doesn't make me a racist to say that. Palestinians deserve self-determination too, but not at the expense of the Jewish people.
Thank you, Jonathan. Oren, did you want to add something?
I'll just be very quick and just say, having worked on the audit for ADL for actually over 20 years, this issue of, where it crosses the line, the anti-Israel activism and rhetoric into anti-Semitism has always been part of the audit. This is not something that we are doing, for the first time. And I think, as Jonathan mentioned, the May conflict was another reminder of how Jews are routinely blamed for the actions of Israel, whether they support Israel or not. Right? This plays into these age-old tropes of dual loyalty. And we can be clear here, right? American Jews have no direct control over Israeli policies. They are, for the most part, not Israeli citizens. They don't vote for the Israeli government. But in the eyes of the anti-Semites, it doesn't matter. If you're Jewish, in their eyes, you are a legitimate target for harassment, vandalism, and assault because of what's happening in Israel. That's what we've been categorizing and documenting for years, and that has been a big part of what we saw this past year.
Thank you, Oren, and thank you, Jonathan. As a reminder, we are going to come back to Q&A, but we're going to leave this part of their conversation for right now. And I do want to let folks know this call is being recorded, and that recording will be circulated in an email to you following it. All right, and with that, I would like to introduce our colleagues from our New York, New Jersey region. Today we have Brina Chu, and she is joined by Regional Director Scott Richman.
Thanks so much, Deb. As Deb said, my name is Scott Richman, and I'm honored to serve as ADL's Regional Director covering our work in New York and New Jersey. My role today is to bring the national perspective on anti-Semitism and the audit down to the local level, where each of the incidents is much more than a number. Each reflects an incident that my staff and I have responded to. And more importantly, they involve a person, a family, a community that have been deeply affected by hate directed at them specifically because they are Jewish, something that is easy to forget when looking at incident tallies in the thousands. Each of these incidents has also been painstakingly analyzed and dealt with in real time across the country by a staff like mine. They're dedicated individuals whose job it is to work with victims, law enforcement, community officials, and synagogues, with social media companies and college officials, and so many more in order to address hate, no matter where or when it strikes. This is real in the trenches work that is often paired with more long-term solutions, such as anti-bias education in hundreds of schools across New York and New Jersey and across the country, advocacy at the state and local level, and decades of relationship building that make this all possible. Of the numbers that you've just heard Jonathan and Oren speak about, just 2 states, New York and New Jersey, accounted for an incredible 29% of the incidents, or 786 acts of anti-Semitism. That means that there were an average of 2 incidents every single day in 2021 in this region. That's an extraordinary volume and represents the highest recorded number in this region since ADL began keeping track of it in 1979. This exceeds pre-pandemic levels and is a full 24% jump from last year's total of 631. As the director of ADL New York, New Jersey, this is no surprise to me. I see it every day. I will add that some of the most heinous acts are carried out in this region. 64% of the 88 assaults that you just heard about were committed in just New York and New Jersey, largely, though not exclusively, against visibly identifiable Jews. We're talking about 57 attacks that were clearly motivated by hatred of Jews, as compared to the 14 the year before, a 307% increase, truly horrific. As a result, we built a close relationship with members of the Hasidic and Haredi communities in New York and New Jersey to call out and respond to such appalling acts. I will add that it's not just assaults that are committed against visibly identifiable Jews. While there are 83 counties in New York and New Jersey, nearly half of the total incidents across the region took place in just 6 of them: Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens in New York, and Bergen, Ocean, and Middlesex in New Jersey. All of these counties have very significant Orthodox Jewish populations. There are many more details to offer about the New York and New Jersey numbers, which you can find at our website, nyj.adl.org. But rather than me taking you through this, I'm going to ask my Associate Director, Brina to briefly do so. I'm honored to oversee this work, but the truth is that the real heroes are the members of my team, such as Brina, who sacrifice themselves every day to advocate for victims and to deal with hate wherever it appears. Brina?
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to pick up where you left off and give everyone a closer look at anti-Semitic incidents in the region this past year. So please note, while this will be an overview, the more in-depth data and insights can be found in our regional report on our website. We encourage you to really check that out to dig a little deeper. So let's start with New York, which led the US in number of anti-Semitic incidents in 2021, with 416 reported incidents, a 24% increase relative to the 336 incidents reported in 2020, and accounting for an astounding 15% of total reported incidents in the US. As an overview of the incident categories in New York State, we recorded 183 incidents of harassment, 182 incidents of vandalism, 161 incidents involving swastika symbols, and 51 incidents of assault, which is the highest number in New York State on record. As Scott already mentioned, each of these incidents, especially the assaults, inflicted terrible shock and suffering onto the victims, their families, and the communities that they belong to. So as a general breakdown of anti-Semitic incidents in New York State by geographic area, historically, we've seen a disproportionate amount of reported incidents occurring in New York City. And this year was no exception, with 260 or 63% of the 416 reported in the state being recorded in our 5 boroughs. As you can see in the graph, Manhattan is leading in number of incidents with 109, followed next by Brooklyn with 84. An especially concerning observation was that reported assaults in New York increased by a staggering 325% in 2021, from 12 incidents in 2020 to 51 this past year. 51 was also a notable increase of 46% from the 35 anti-Semitic assaults recorded in New York State in 2019 pre-pandemic. Geographically, the 51 assaults recorded in the state accounted for 57%, or over half of the total number of reported national assaults in 2021. Of those, an astounding 48 or 94% took place in the 5 boroughs of New York City. Over half of the assaults were reported in Brooklyn, which continues to be a hot spot for violent anti-Semitic activity in the past years. Many of the anti-Semitic assaults recorded in 2021 were very brutal in nature. In one incident in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, a visibly Jewish man was shot with a BB gun while walking down a sidewalk, and at least 8 of the anti-Semitic assaults included victims who were children. In 2021, 62 incidents, 41% more than the 44 reported in 2020, were recorded as having targeted Jewish institutions, including synagogues, JCCs, and other institutions. If you're looking for charts or graphics on this, we don't have any to show right now, but please feel free to reach out to us afterwards. In a different category, 45 or 11% of the total reported anti-Semitic incidents that took place in New York State included explicit references to Israel or Zionism. We followed the national pattern that was discussed, with over half of these incidents, 53%, being documented during the month of May, when there was a significant uptick in incidents that coincided with the escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas. Incidents related to Israel and Zionism included instances of physical assaults where, for example, many of you have heard, a man wearing an IDF sweatshirt was punched and called a, quote, dirty Jew when he refused to remove his sweatshirt. Another man was beaten and choked by a group who demanded that he say, quote, free Palestine. And a Hasidic Jewish child's arm was grabbed and shaken while a man yelled at him, asking why the child and his friends were, quote, killing kids in Gaza. Lastly, a total of 39 incidents were recorded in non-Jewish K-12 schools. This number represents an 105% increase relative to the 19 incidents recorded in 2020. We acknowledge this is likely due in part to the suspension of in-person classes during the pandemic, and there was a 10% decrease relative to 43 incidents recorded in 2019. Notwithstanding this decrease, however, incidents in K-12 schools appear disturbingly to have generally returned to pre-pandemic levels. Moving on to New Jersey, there were 370 anti-Semitic incidents recorded, which is the highest number ever recorded by ADL in the state. Our previous high was 345 in 2019. This was also the second highest number, only second to New York, recorded in any state across the country last year. And this represents an increase of 34% relative to the 295 recorded last year. In 2021, we recorded 252 incidents of harassment, 112 incidents of vandalism, and 6 incidents of assault. all of these categories did see increases in incidents since 2020. And here quickly, you can see that again, 2021 was the highest year on record for New Jersey. And you can see here a breakdown of the last 10 years from 2012 leading up to 2021. So geographically, ADL documented the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents in the following counties in New Jersey: Bergen, Ocean, Middlesex, Union, and Mercer. Notably, Bergen overtook Ocean County in 2021, with Ocean County having had previously held the record for most reported incidents in 2019 and 2020. And notably, 3 of the 6 anti-Semitic assaults that reportedly did take place in New Jersey occurred in Ocean County. Taking a look at the data for assaults in New Jersey, the 6 documented anti-Semitic assaults in 2021 represents a sharp increase relative to the 2 recorded in the state in 2020. Notably, the 6 reported anti-Semitic assaults surpassed the 5 reported assaults in 2019, which included the deadly shooting attack in Jersey City. The other 3 reported assaults were reported in Voorhees, which included an assault with a vehicle at a synagogue parking lot, Passaic, where a Jewish individual was threatened, harassed, and his religious garments were grabbed off of him, and New Brunswick, where an incident reportedly took place at the Rutgers University Chabad House. Also of particular concern were the 44 incidents recorded at Jewish institutions, a significant 76% increase compared to the 25 incidents recorded in Jewish institutions in 2020, and an 144% increase since the 18 recorded in 2019. These increases to us signal an alarming trend shift towards the anti-Semitic targeting of institutions that serve as major resource hubs for the Jewish community. Lastly, in 2021, 82 anti-Semitic incidents were reported in non-Jewish K-12 schools in New Jersey, which was an 110% increase relative to 39 in 2020. And while this increase is alarming, it is comparable to what we observed pre-pandemic in 2019, when we saw 97 incidents were reported in non-Jewish K-12 schools. So to conclude, as you've seen from this data, the New York, New Jersey region sadly continues to lead the nation in terms of total reported anti-Semitic incidents. Specifically, the dramatic spike in assaults in both states brings to light a concerning rise in violence targeting Jewish communities in 2 states that house significantly large and vibrant Jewish populations, with New York being home to around 1.75 million Jewish people, and New Jersey being home to around 590,000 Jewish people. And with that, that's all from me. I'll hand it back to Deb to lead us in another round of Q&A.
Thank you, Brina and Scott. I appreciate that. All right, so let us dive back into Q&A. We have received multiple variations of this question. And Jonathan, I think this is probably going to fall to you, maybe Oren as well. But the question of how do you think the sale of Twitter to Elon Musk is going to affect the proliferation of hate speech?
I think that's a question on the minds of many people across the country, really around the world today. I guess I'll give you a few initial thoughts and then open it up to my colleagues. So first and foremost, I think I will say right up front that in an environment in which Twitter, and by the way, Facebook, have really become the public square, it is where the public conversation takes place. It is troubling that 2 individuals will own it. Public places that are commercial are called shopping malls, right? And companies own them and they behave by rules. Public squares where everyone has a voice are not something that I think should be commercialized. So I think that in and of itself, 2 men with almost no accountability are going to be responsible for this is a sign of a dysfunctional democracy. Put that aside for a second. We don't really know how Elon is going to run the company. He has claimed to be he's going to pursue free speech. I think he's pursuing economic opportunity. He's a capitalist through and through, and he looks at 3 billion people on Facebook and 2.2 billion on YouTube and 1 billion plus on TikTok, and he sees 200 million on Twitter, and he sees growth opportunity. So I think that's what's driving him. He's going to take out tens of billions of dollars of debt to finance this deal. He's got to pay it somehow, and I think he's going to pay it by trying to monetize and improve the product. On the other hand, I don't think that free speech is the real issue on Twitter. I think hate speech is the problem on Twitter. And I'm all for him doing things like improving the product, opening up the algorithm so people can choose. Those could be very healthy. But the default needs to be down the middle. So people, particularly vulnerable people, whether it's children or Jewish users or other minority users aren't targeted and victimized on the service. And if they are, the service should provide tools for them to seek some recourse. Ultimately, I think all of this could be handled by simply acknowledging what we all know to be true. Twitter is, like Facebook, like Google, a publisher, and it should be governed as such or considered as such by the law, and therefore liable when people commit acts of libel on the service, because freedom of speech isn't the freedom to slander. So I would like to, we could choose to be cautiously optimistic. We don't know what Alon's going to do, but I hope he will not make Twitter, or he won't reinstate Twitter as a cesspool of, Nazism and anti-Zionism. Neither of those forces, I think, are helpful, are healthy or helpful for a vibrant public conversation.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Did any of the other folks want to weigh in on that before we move on? I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer. Thank you for that. The other question I think we've probably seen the most of is, what can people do? They can report. What else can they do? How else can folks better help stop the spread of anti-Semitism and hate?
I'd love for Scott to answer. Scott and Brianna, what do you see on the ground in New York?
So I think there are a lot of ways that people can help. First of all, in terms of social media, each of us have a responsibility for calling out hate and misinformation. A lot of us rail against it, but every one of these social media companies have content moderation policies. A violation of those policies can get an account suspended or revoked. That's something that an individual can do all the time. And of course, ADL is out there not just responding to incidents in a very reactive way, but we're also working very proactively. So promoting ADL's anti-bias and anti-bullying programs across the country, which touch millions, is a very important way. If you know a teacher, if you know an administrator, it shouldn't be that we come to a school when there's an incident and it's the first time we've had a connection with them. We want to be in there. We want to have that relationship with them and be working with them to create an atmosphere where people respect one another and celebrate diversity and celebrate difference.
Those are some great points and good ideas. Thank you, Scott. Does anyone else want to weigh in before we move on? All right, good answer, Scott, when no one else needs to weigh in. All right, I think we have time probably for one more question. And so I'm going to ask about the importance of funding for Jewish communal institutions to help keep them safe. Certainly something that we've been advocating for. Jonathan, is that something you'd like to speak to?
Totally. I'll get us started, and then maybe Scott or Ben can put topic on the ground, or Oren can pan out and provide a wider perspective. Look, I think we believe that our community, and by the way, other communities, can only be safe with a combination of security and solidarity. First of all, security. We need tight coordination with law enforcement, which is critical to identify and address extremist threats. The idea that you can't work with law enforcement is a joke and does a disservice to vulnerable communities. Now there's room for improvement in the way law enforcement conducts itself, sure. By the way, like any institution, they have a particular role in the way that they conduct themselves with certain communities of color, but we need them on our side. We need them to do better. We need them to identify and arrest people who commit hate crimes and to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. So we're proud to work with law enforcement. We'll continue to do so for the foreseeable future. That being said, the federal government has a role to play in providing resources. We're very pleased that Congress increased the funding for something called the Nonprofit Security Grants Program that gives dollars from DHS to houses of worship or communal institutions that have a relationship to faith. Super important. And then finally, solidarity. We can't do this alone. We need to work with others. That's a big part of this work.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, folks, I think that's about all we have time for today, but I want to thank Jonathan, Scott, Brina, and Oren for being with us today and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And I want to let folks know that the link to the full report can be found in the chat and will also be circulated in the email along with the recording of this session. So I want to thank everyone for joining us here today, and I hope that you will keep an eye on your inbox for the next Fighting Hate from Home that will take place next month. And until then, please stay well, and we'll see you soon.